The dust storm came without warning on that scorching August afternoon in 1878, transforming the wagon train's path through western Kansas into a hellish nightmare of choking brown clouds that turned day into twilight. Nora Owens clung to the side of her family's covered wagon, screaming for her mother over the howling wind. But the sound was swallowed by nature's fury as thoroughly as if she had never made a noise at all. When the dust finally settled 3 hours later, she stood alone on the prairie with nothing but the clothes on her back and a canteen that had somehow remained looped around her shoulder. She was 21 years old, and she had just lost everything. The wagon train was gone. Her mother, her father, her 2 younger brothers, all vanished somewhere in that brown hell. Nora turned in every direction, calling their names until her voice grew hoarse and her throat burned from the dust still coating her mouth. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Now those colors only reminded her that darkness was coming, and she was utterly alone in a landscape so vast it seemed to swallow hope itself. She had no horse, no supplies, no weapon. Just the simple cotton dress she wore, already torn at the hem from stumbling through the storm, and the canteen that held perhaps 2 days' worth of water if she was careful. Nora knew the basics of survival from growing up on the trail. Her family had been heading west to claim land in Colorado after losing their farm in Missouri to debt. But knowing and doing were entirely different matters when you were alone. The first night was the worst. She huddled in a shallow depression in the earth, pulling dried grass around herself for warmth as the temperature dropped. Every sound made her start, imagining wolves or worse. She had heard the stories around the campfire, tales of what happened to women alone on the frontier. Those stories kept her awake long after exhaustion should have claimed her. Dawn brought no relief. Nora stood on shaking legs and tried to determine which direction to walk. The wagon train had been heading west, she knew that much, but the storm could have turned her around completely. She studied the sun's position and made her best guess, then started walking because staying still meant dying slowly. By the second day, her lips were cracked and bleeding. The canteen was nearly empty. She had seen no sign of civilization, no other travelers, nothing but endless prairie grass and the occasional stand of cottonwood trees that marked a creek bed, though most of those were dry this late in the summer. Nora found herself talking aloud just to hear a human voice, even if it was only her own. "Mother would tell me to pray," she said, her voice a raspy whisper. "Father would tell me to keep moving, and here I am doing both, and it does not seem to be helping much." She was considering whether to stop and try to dig for water near one of the dry creek beds when she saw the rider. He was perhaps a mile away, a dark figure on horseback moving perpendicular to her path. Nora's first instinct was to hide, but she was too exposed, and besides, she was dying out here anyway. A quick death at the hands of an outlaw might be preferable to the slow agony of thirst. She raised her arms and waved, shouting with what little voice she had left. The rider changed direction. As he drew closer, Nora could make out more details. He sat tall in the saddle, wearing the practical clothing of someone who worked the land or cattle, a dark hat, worn leather vest, and chaps that had seen hard use. He rode with the easy grace of someone who had spent more of his life on horseback than on foot. 2 other horses trailed behind him on lead ropes, both laden with supplies. When he was close enough for her to see his face, she was surprised by how young he looked, probably close to her own age, with sun-darkened skin and eyes that were cautious but not unkind. He pulled his horse to a stop about 10 feet away, his right hand resting near the pistol at his hip in a gesture that was casual but unmistakably ready. "You are a long way from anywhere, miss," he said. His voice was deeper than she expected, with a slight drawl that suggested Texas origins. "Are you hurt, lost?" Nora managed. "Dust storm. My family's wagon train, I cannot find them." He studied her for a long moment, and she was acutely aware of how she must look. Filthy, disheveled, lips cracked and face burned by the sun. Then he nodded once and dismounted, pulling a canteen from his saddle. "Drink slow," he said, offering it to her. "Not too much at once or you will be sick." The water was the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. Nora forced herself to follow his instruction, taking small sips even though every fiber of her being screamed to gulp it down. When she finally lowered the canteen, she found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Thank you," she said. "I am Nora Owens." "Dalton Hayes," he replied. "I have a small ranch about 8 miles northwest of here. You can rest there and we can figure out how to find your people." "You would do that? You do not even know me." Something flickered across his face, an old pain perhaps, there and gone too quickly to identify. "Out here, we help each other. It is the only way any of us survive." He helped her onto one of the pack horses after redistributing some of the supplies, and they rode in silence through the afternoon heat. Nora found herself studying him when she thought he was not looking. Dalton Hayes moved with quiet confidence, constantly scanning the horizon, reading the land in ways she did not understand. Once he pointed out the tracks of her own stumbling path from the previous day, showing her how she had been walking in a gradual circle that would have led her right back to where she started. "The prairie plays tricks," he said. "Without landmarks, most people cannot walk straight." His ranch, when they finally reached it as the sun was setting, was modest but well-maintained. A small house built of sod and timber, a barn that looked newer than the house, and a corral holding perhaps a dozen horses. A creek ran behind the property and Nora could hear the blessed sound of running water. "It is not much," Dalton said, helping her down from the horse, "but it is mine. Built it myself over the past 3 years." "It is beautiful," Nora said and meant it. After 2 days of believing she would die alone on the empty prairie, anything with 4 walls and fresh water was beautiful. He showed her to the house, which consisted of a single large room divided by function rather than walls. A kitchen area with a wood stove, a table and chairs, a bed in one corner, and shelves holding books, supplies, and various tools. It was clean and organized, the home of someone who lived alone and took care with what he had. "You take the bed," Dalton said. "I will sleep in the barn." "I cannot take your bed. You have already done too much." "Not a discussion, Miss Owens. You need proper rest." He was already gathering a blanket and pillow. "There is a barrel outside where you can wash if you like. I will make something to eat." Nora was too tired to argue further. She washed away days of dirt and dust, changed into a spare shirt Dalton provided that hung to her knees, and returned to find him cooking beans and bacon over the stove. The smell made her stomach growl so loudly they both heard it. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "Before the storm." "Day before yesterday morning." He shook his head and ladled generous portions onto 2 tin plates. They ate in comfortable silence, and Nora found herself relaxing for the first time since the disaster. There was something steady about Dalton Hayes, something that made her feel safe in a way she had not expected. "Tomorrow I will ride to Concord," he said as they finished eating. "It is the nearest town, about 15 miles east. If your wagon train made it through, someone there might have word. If not, we can send telegrams to other towns along the route." "Why are you helping me?" The question came out before Nora could stop it. "You do not know anything about me." Dalton was quiet for a moment, washing their plates in a basin. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. 5 years ago, my mother and sister were traveling to meet my father and me in Dodge City. Their stage was attacked. No one helped them. No one even tried. He set a plate down carefully. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone in need, I would. No questions. No hesitation. I am sorry, Nora whispered. So am I. He dried his hands on a cloth. Get some rest, Miss Owens. Tomorrow we start looking for your family. But tomorrow brought only disappointment. Dalton rode to Concord and returned in the late afternoon with news that no wagon train matching her description had passed through. The telegraph operator had sent messages to towns along the western route, but responses would take days to arrive, and there was no guarantee they would bring good news. They could have changed direction, Dalton said gently as they sat at his table. The storm might have pushed them north or south, or they could be looking for you same as you are looking for them. Or they could be dead, Nora said flatly. Or they could think I am dead and have continued on without me. We will keep looking. For how long? You have a ranch to run. I cannot expect you to spend all your time searching for people who might not want to be found. Dalton leaned back in his chair, studying her. What are you saying? I am saying that maybe I need to accept that I am on my own now. The words hurt to speak, but Nora forced them out anyway. My family is gone. I have no money, no skills, nothing to offer anyone. I need to figure out how to survive. You can stay here. The offer hung in the air between them. Nora stared at him, trying to determine if he meant what she feared he meant, but his expression was earnest and without guile. Stay here and do what exactly? She asked carefully. Work. I could use help with the horses. I am trying to build up a breeding program, selling trained mounts to the army and to ranchers. It is more work than one person can handle properly. He spoke quickly, as if afraid she would interrupt. You would have your own space. I could partition off part of the house or fix up the loft in the barn. Wages would be fair, same as I would pay any ranch hand. You would trust me with your horses. I know nothing about training them, but you can learn, and there is plenty of other work. Cooking, mending tack, keeping accounts. I am terrible with the books. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Nora was beginning to recognize as a sign of nervousness. Look, I know it is not proper, a man and woman living on the same property without family around. But out here, proper does not always matter as much as practical. You need a place to stay, and I genuinely need help. It makes sense. It did make sense in a stark frontier way that would have horrified her mother. But her mother was gone, possibly dead, and Nora was faced with the reality of her situation. She could try to make it to the nearest city and find work as a seamstress or laundress, competing with dozens of other women for low wages and poor conditions. Or she could stay here, learn something useful, and have a chance to build something resembling a future. All right, she said, but I earn my keep. No charity. Agreed. Dalton extended his hand and they shook on it like business partners. The next morning he began teaching her about horses. Nora had ridden before, of course, but there was a vast difference between sitting on a wagon horse and actually understanding the animals. Dalton proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to read a horse's mood from the position of its ears, how to approach without startling, how to check hooves for stones, and apply basic medicine to cuts and scrapes. Horses are honest, he told her as they worked together to brush down a sorrel mare. They do not lie about how they feel. Ears back means angry or scared. Head high and nostrils flaring means alert, possibly spooked. Relaxed ears and a lowered head means content. He demonstrated each expression, and Nora found herself fascinated. How did you learn all this? She asked. My father was a horse trader, traveled from Texas to Montana, buying and selling. I grew up in the saddle, learned by watching and doing. His hands moved expertly over the mare's coat, working out tangles. When he died, he left me enough money to buy this land and start my own operation. Smaller scale than what he did, but honest work. They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Nora rose at dawn and started coffee while Dalton fed the horses. They worked together through the morning, training the young animals or exercising the older ones. After a midday meal, Nora would handle indoor tasks while Dalton worked on maintaining the property or road to check fence lines. Evenings they spent together, Dalton teaching her to keep the ranch accounts while he mended tack or read from his small collection of books. It was a simple life, and Nora was surprised to find herself content. She wrote letters to various frontier postmasters, describing her family and asking if anyone matching their description had passed through. But as the weeks turned into months with no response, she found herself thinking about them less and less. The grief was still there, a constant ache beneath her ribs, but survival demanded that she keep moving forward. What she did think about increasingly was Dalton Hayes. He was unlike any man she had known before. The men in her family's circle back in Missouri had been farmers and shopkeepers, practical but limited in their thinking. Dalton had a curiosity about the world that matched her own. He would point out constellations at night, explaining the stories behind them. He noticed small things, the way light changed as seasons shifted, the different songs of different birds, and he treated her as an equal partner in the ranch work, never dismissing her questions or suggestions. She began noticing other things too. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. The strength in his hands when he helped her onto a horse. The sound of his laugh, rare but genuine, when something truly amused him. These observations came with a flutter in her chest that Nora tried to ignore but could not deny. It was early October when things shifted between them. They had spent the day breaking a young gelding to saddle, frustrating work that required patience and persistence. The horse had finally accepted the saddle without bucking, a small victory that left them both tired but satisfied. Dalton had gone to the creek to wash off the day's dirt and sweat, and Nora was preparing dinner when she heard him shout. She ran outside to find him at the edge of the creek, holding his right hand, blood dripping between his fingers. "What happened? Stupid," he said through gritted teeth. "Slipped on wet rocks, tried to catch myself on a broken branch, went right through my palm." Nora took his hand gently, examining the wound. It was deep, still bleeding steadily with splinters of wood embedded in the torn flesh. "Come inside. I need to clean this properly." She worked by lamplight, using water boiled on the stove and cloth torn from an old shirt. Dalton sat still as she cleaned the wound, picking out splinters with tweezers, though she could feel the tension in his arm. "I am sorry," she murmured. "I know this hurts. I have had worse." But his voice was tight. "That does not mean this does not hurt." She glanced up at his face and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What? You have gentle hands," he said quietly. "Kind hands. I am trying not to hurt you more than necessary. I do not just mean now. I mean in general. The way you handle the horses, the way you do everything. There is a gentleness to you, even after everything you have been through." Nora focused on wrapping his hand with clean bandaging, afraid to meet his eyes. "I do not feel particularly gentle. Most days I feel hard, like I had to become hard to survive. Strength and gentleness are not opposites." His left hand came up to cup her cheek, turning her face toward his. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, Nora Owens." They were very close now, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough to feel the warmth of his breath. Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Dalton," she whispered, though she had no idea what she meant to say next. He kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, a question more than a demand. Nora's first kiss had been a clumsy thing behind a barn when she was 16, quickly forgotten. This was entirely different. This felt like coming home to a place she had never been but had always been searching for. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted, "but I did not want you to think I expected it, that it was somehow payment for giving you a place to stay. I did not think that." Nora's hands were still resting on his shoulders. "I have wanted it too. I just thought you saw me as an employee, nothing more." "God, no, you are so much more than that." He pulled back enough to look at her properly. "You are my partner, my friend. And somewhere along the way I fell in love with you." The words should have frightened her. Instead, they felt inevitable, like something that had been written long before they met and was only now being spoken aloud. "I love you too," she said, and kissed him again. That night, Dalton slept in the house, though they maintained propriety with Nora in the bed and Dalton on a bedroll near the stove. But they talked late into the night, sharing stories and dreams. He told her about growing up on the trail, about the father he had admired and lost. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her brother's mischief and her mother's quiet strength. "You think they are still alive?" Dalton asked gently. "Your family?" Nora was quiet for a long time. "I do not know. Some days I am certain I would feel it if they were dead, that I would know somehow. Other days I think that is just foolishness, me wanting to believe in something that makes the loss easier to bear. It is not foolishness to hope, maybe not. But at some point, hope without evidence becomes denial." She stared at the ceiling beams. "I wrote to the territorial governor's office last week, asking if any families matching their description had filed land claims in Colorado. That is the last thing I can think to do. If that brings nothing, then I have to accept that I will never know what happened to them. And if you never know, can you live with that?" "I am living with it now," Nora said softly. "I will keep living with it. What other choice do I have?" Dalton's hand found hers in the darkness, their fingers intertwining. "You always have choices, Nora. Maybe not good ones, but choices nonetheless. And whatever you choose, wherever this leads, I am with you." Those words sustained her through the winter months that followed. Kansas winters were harsh, with winds that cut like knives and snowstorms that could bury a person in hours. They spent long days inside, Nora sewing or cooking while Dalton worked on plans for expanding the ranch. On clear days, they ventured out together to care for the horses, working quickly before the cold became unbearable. It was during these close winter months that Nora truly came to know Dalton Hayes. She learned that he hummed tunelessly when he was concentrating, that he was terrible at cards but loved to play anyway, that he had a deep fear of failing at the ranch and being forced to give up his independence. She learned that he slept poorly when it stormed, nightmares of his mother and sister's deaths still haunting him years later. She learned that he loved her with a steadiness that was both comforting and thrilling, that he showed his affection in 100 small ways throughout each day. They did not speak of marriage. It seemed premature somehow, though they both knew the direction they were heading. Nora wanted to hear back from the governor's office first, to have some closure on her past before fully committing to her future. The response came in March, delivered by a rider from Concord along with the first real warmth of spring. Nora stood in the yard, reading the official letter with Dalton beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "They have no record of anyone matching your family's description filing claims anywhere in Colorado territory," she read aloud. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly. Several families were lost in dust storms in the summer of 1878, and it is likely your family was among them. Please accept our condolences for your loss. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her pocket. Nora, Dalton said gently, I am all right. And she was, in a way. The not knowing had been worse than this confirmation. At least now she could grieve properly, could let herself accept what had likely been true all along. They are gone. They have been gone. Now I can stop waiting for them to come back. I am sorry. So am I. She turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. But I am also grateful. If that storm had not separated us, I would be in Colorado right now, helping my father work land we could barely afford, probably married off to some neighboring farmer to create an alliance. I would never have met you. I would never have learned that I could be strong on my own, that I could build something with my own hands. You are remarkable, Dalton said, pulling her close. I am practical, Nora corrected. Remarkably practical, he laughed, the sound warming her from the inside out. Then, practically speaking, would you consider marrying me? I know I should have a ring, should do this properly, but I cannot wait another moment to ask. Practically speaking, we are already living as partners. Marriage would simply make it official in the eyes of the law. She smiled up at him. But yes, Dalton Hayes, I will marry you. They rode into Concord the next week to speak with the circuit preacher, who agreed to marry them on his next visit in 2 weeks' time. The town was small but growing, with new businesses opening as more settlers arrived. Nora bought fabric for a new dress, determined to be married in something other than her worn work clothes, while Dalton arranged for 2 witnesses and a small celebration at the town's only hotel. The wedding was simple but perfect. Nora wore a dress she had sewn herself from deep blue calico, her hair braided and wound with wildflowers Dalton had picked that morning. He wore his best shirt and vest, his hair still damp from washing. The preacher, a kind older man named Reverend Matthews, spoke about partnership and commitment, about building a life together through hard work and mutual respect. When Dalton kissed her as his wife, Nora felt tears on her cheeks, though whether they were joy or grief or some combination of both, she could not say. She was gaining everything she wanted while mourning what she had lost, and somehow both feelings existed together in her heart without contradiction. They spent their wedding night at the hotel, a luxury that felt almost sinful after months of frontier simplicity. The room had a real bed with a feather mattress, curtains on the windows, and a pitcher of hot water for washing. Dalton was gentle and patient, and Nora was glad she had married a man she loved, who loved her in return. It made the intimacy sweet rather than frightening. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Dalton traced patterns on her shoulder with his fingertips. "What are you thinking?" Nora asked. "That I am the luckiest man alive, that I found my family when I thought I would always be alone. You found me because you were kind enough to help a stranger dying on the prairie. No, I found you because you were strong enough to survive until I got there. Anyone else would have given up, but you kept walking." He kissed her temple. "We found each other, Nora, and we chose each other. That matters." They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, and life continued its familiar rhythm, though everything felt different now. The work was the same, caring for horses and maintaining the property, but Nora approached it with a new sense of ownership. This was her home now, legally and emotionally. These horses were her responsibility as much as Dalton's. This future they were building was genuinely theirs. Spring brought new foals, including twins from their best mare, a rare occurrence that had Dalton grinning for days. Nora helped with the births, learning to assist when necessary and when to step back and let nature take its course. The foals were gangly and adorable, and she spent hours watching them discover their legs and personalities. "This is what I love about horses," Dalton told her one evening as they watched the foals play in the corral. "Every single one is different, unique. You cannot predict who they will become just by looking at them when they are born. You have to watch them grow, see what they show you." "People are like that too," Nora observed. "Some people. Others are exactly what they seem from the start." He glanced at her. "I knew what you were the moment I saw you, a fighter, a survivor. You could not have known that from seeing me stumbling around the prairie half dead from thirst. I knew because you were still walking. You had not given up. That told me everything I needed to know about who you are." Summer brought its own challenges, including a drought that had them hauling water from the creek to supplement what the horses needed. Dalton taught Nora to shoot, insisting she should know how to defend herself and the ranch when he was away. She proved to be a decent shot after some practice, though she hoped she would never need to use the skill for real. In August, exactly 1 year after the dust storm that had changed her life, Nora realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, noticing small changes in her body, but she waited until she was certain before telling Dalton. She chose a quiet evening after dinner when they were sitting outside watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "I have news," she said, taking his hand. "Good news, I hope." "I think so. I am with child. The baby should come in late winter, probably February." Dalton's expression went through several rapid changes: shock, joy, fear, settling finally on a happiness so pure it made her throat tight. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Nora asked, though she could see the answer on his face. Happy does not even begin to describe it. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of glass. "Are you happy, I mean? I know this will make things harder for you, the work and everything." "I am terrified," Nora admitted. "My mother always said childbirth was the hardest thing she ever did, and she did it 4 times. I watched my younger brother being born when I was 10, saw how much pain she was in. And now I am going to go through that without her here to help me. We will find someone to help. There must be a midwife in Concord, or we can bring someone from a larger town. You will not be alone, Nora. I promise you that." She believed him. Over the past year, Dalton had proven himself reliable in every way that mattered. If he said he would find help, he would move heaven and earth to do it. As her pregnancy progressed, Dalton became almost comically protective. He insisted she stop helping with the more physical ranch work. Nearly had an apoplexy when he caught her trying to lift a heavy saddle, and treated her as if she might break at any moment. "I am pregnant, not dying," Nora told him exasperatedly one afternoon when he tried to stop her from walking to the creek to fetch water. "Women have been doing this for all of human history. I can handle fetching water. Let me do it. You should rest." "I have been resting all morning. If I rest anymore, I will go mad from boredom." She took the bucket from his hands. "Dalton, I love you, but you have to let me do some things. I need to feel useful." He sighed but relented, following her to the creek and hovering anxiously as she filled the bucket. Nora tried to be patient with his overprotectiveness, knowing it came from love and fear of loss, but there were days when she wanted to scream at him to treat her normally. The midwife Dalton found was a capable woman named Mrs. Fletcher, who lived in Concord and had delivered more babies than she could count. She examined Nora in November and pronounced everything normal and healthy. "Your hips are wide enough, and you are strong from all that ranch work," Mrs. Fletcher said in her no-nonsense way. "First babies usually take their time coming, so when the pains start, you send your husband to fetch me, and I will be here as quick as I can. In the meantime, eat well, sleep plenty, and do not listen to old wives' tales about what you should and should not do. Nora liked her immediately. Winter settled over the ranch, and Nora grew larger and more uncomfortable. She could no longer see her feet, struggled to find comfortable sleeping positions, and developed a constant ache in her lower back. But there were also moments of wonder. Feeling the baby move inside her, watching Dalton's face light up when he pressed his hand to her belly and felt a kick, imagining the life they would build as a family of 3. The baby came on a bitter cold night in late February, 2 weeks later than Mrs. Fletcher had predicted. Nora's water broke just after midnight, waking her and Dalton both. He rode through snow and darkness to Concord, returning with Mrs. Fletcher as the first contractions began in earnest. The birth was exactly as hard as Nora's mother had described. Hours of increasing pain, exhaustion beyond anything she had imagined, moments when she was certain she could not continue. But she also discovered reserves of strength she had not known she possessed, and Mrs. Fletcher's steady competence made all the difference. "You are doing fine, dear," the midwife said during a particularly difficult contraction. "I know it does not feel that way, but you are progressing well. A few more hours and you will have your baby." Dalton stayed by her side the entire time, letting her squeeze his hand until his fingers went white, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement even though he looked as terrified as Nora felt. His presence was the anchor that kept her grounded when the pain threatened to sweep her away entirely. Finally, as dawn light began filtering through the windows, Nora pushed her son into the world. He was red-faced and squalling, perfect in every way. Mrs. Fletcher cleaned him efficiently and placed him in Nora's arms, and suddenly all the pain and fear evaporated like morning dew. "A boy," Nora whispered, tracing his tiny features with a gentle finger. "We have a son." Dalton was crying openly, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his child. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe this is real." They named him Samuel after Dalton's father, with Owen as a middle name to honor Nora's lost family. Little Samuel Hayes had his father's dark hair and his mother's nose, and from the first moment, Nora loved him with a ferocity that astonished her. The early weeks were challenging. Samuel nursed frequently, leaving Nora exhausted and overwhelmed. Dalton helped however he could, changing cloths when the baby soiled them, walking the floor during fussy spells, handling all the ranch work so Nora could focus on recovering and caring for their son. Mrs. Fletcher visited regularly to check on them both, offering advice and reassurance when Nora doubted her abilities as a mother. "You are doing wonderfully," the midwife told her during one such visit. "The baby is healthy and gaining weight. You are healing well. Those are the 2 most important things." "I feel like I have no idea what I am doing," Nora admitted. "What if I am getting it all wrong? Every new mother feels that way, but look at him." Mrs. Fletcher gestured to Samuel, sleeping peacefully in Nora's arms. "Does he look unhappy to you?" Babies are simple creatures. They need to be fed, kept clean and warm and loved. You are doing all those things. As the weeks turned to months, Nora grew more confident in her abilities. She learned to read Samuel's different cries to anticipate his needs before he got too upset. Dalton was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, talking to him as if he could understand every word, introducing him to the horses with careful supervision. "He is going to be a horseman just like his grandfather," Dalton said one spring afternoon, holding 4-month-old Samuel as they watched the foals in the corral. "See how he watches them. He is fascinated." "He is 4 months old," Nora pointed out with amusement. "He is fascinated by everything." "No, this is different. Look at his eyes. He is really watching." Nora laughed but did not argue further. She loved seeing Dalton with their son, loved the family they had built from nothing. Sometimes she thought about her lost family, wondering if her mother would have liked Dalton, if her father would have approved of the life she had chosen, if her brothers would have been good uncles to Samuel. The grief was still there, but it had transformed into something gentler, a bittersweet ache rather than a sharp pain. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Dalton's reputation for training quality horses spread, and they had more buyers than they could accommodate. By the time Samuel was walking and getting into everything, they had expanded the barn and added another corral. Nora handled most of the business accounts now, discovering she had a head for numbers and negotiation. "We could hire help," Dalton suggested one evening as they reviewed the books. "We are making enough to afford a ranch hand, maybe two. It would make things easier." "It would," Nora agreed, "but I like it being just us, our family, our work. Even when that work means you are up until midnight doing accounts after spending all day chasing a toddler and managing horses." Even then, she looked up from the ledger to meet his eyes. "This is ours, Dalton. Everything we have built, we did it together. I am not ready to share that yet." He came around the table to kiss her. "All right. But when you change your mind, when it gets to be too much, you tell me. I will." Samuel grew from a baby into a curious, energetic boy who inherited his father's love of horses and his mother's stubborn determination. By the time he was 3, he was already helping with simple ranch tasks, fetching tools and brushes, talking to the horses in a constant stream of chatter that made both his parents laugh. Nora found herself pregnant again when Samuel was 4, and this time she knew what to expect. The pregnancy was easier in some ways, harder in others. She knew the discomforts would pass, knew what to prepare for the birth, but she was also chasing after an active 4-year-old while growing increasingly large and tired. Their daughter was born on a warm June evening in 1883, 5 years after Nora had lost her original family and gained a new one. The birth was faster than Samuel's had been, and Mrs. Fletcher pronounced it one of the easiest she had attended. "Having done this before makes all the difference," the midwife said as she placed the baby in Nora's arms. "Your body knew what to do this time." They named her Lucy, and she was perfect, tiny and dark-eyed with a surprisingly loud cry for such a small thing. Samuel was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to help with everything, though he had to be constantly reminded to be gentle. "She is so little," he said wonderingly, touching her tiny hand with one finger. "Was I that little?" "You were," Dalton confirmed, "and just as perfect." Life with 2 children was chaotic, but joyful. Nora's days were full of nursing and diaper changes, of mediating Samuel's enthusiastic attempts to play with his baby sister, of somehow finding time to help with ranch work and keep the household running. Dalton continued to be a devoted father and partner, sharing responsibilities and never complaining about the work. They hired their first ranch hand when Lucy was 6 months old, a young man named Tom who was eager to learn the horse trade. He lived in the barn's loft and took over many of the daily maintenance tasks, freeing Dalton to focus on training and Nora to spend more time with the children and the business accounts. "I was right, was I not?" Dalton said one evening as they watched Tom expertly handle feeding time. "About hiring help, you were," Nora admitted. "Though I will deny saying that if you ever tell anyone else." He laughed and pulled her close, both of them watching their children play in the yard under the golden light of sunset. "This is everything I never knew I wanted. You, the kids, the ranch, all of it. Even the parts where Samuel tried to ride the new foal without permission and gave us both heart failure, even those parts. They keep life interesting." Nora leaned against him, feeling utterly content. I think about them sometimes. My first family. Wonder what they would think of all this. I think they would be proud of you, Dalton said softly. Of the life you have built, the person you have become. I hope so. I like to imagine my mother watching over us somehow, that she got to see Samuel and Lucy even if she never got to hold them. Tell me about her. I feel like I know your father from your stories, but you rarely talk about your mother. Nora was quiet for a moment, gathering memories that had faded slightly over the years. She was kind but tough. Had to be, raising 4 children in poverty while my father tried and failed at various schemes to make money. She taught me to sew, to cook with almost nothing, to find joy in small things. She used to sing while she worked, old songs from her childhood in Virginia. I wish I could remember all the words. Sing what you remember, for the children. So Nora sang, her voice soft and slightly off-key, remembering fragments of her mother's songs. Samuel stopped playing to listen, and even baby Lucy seemed attentive. Dalton held them all close, and Nora felt the two halves of her life, the family she had lost and the family she had found, joining together in a moment of perfect peace. Years passed in the way they do on a working ranch, marked by seasons and growth rather than dates on a calendar. Samuel grew tall and strong, becoming his father's shadow, learning everything Dalton could teach him about horses. Lucy was more interested in the business side, often sitting with Nora as she managed accounts, asking precocious questions about numbers and money. "Why do we charge more for the trained horses than the young ones?" she asked when she was 7. "Because we have put time and work into training them," Nora explained. "That time and work has value, so we charge for it. But the young horses will grow up to be trained horses. Should we not charge the same? That is called potential value versus actual value. The young horse might become a trained horse, but it also might not. Some cannot be trained for various reasons. So we charge for what we know the horse can do now, not what it might do later." Lucy considered this seriously. "That makes sense. But could we not charge a middle price for the young ones based on their potential?" "We could, and some traders do. But we prefer to charge fair prices for actual value. It makes our buyers trust us more, which means they come back and recommend us to others. Reputation has value too." These conversations delighted Nora, reminding her that her daughter had inherited her practical mind and head for business. Samuel had Dalton's gift with animals, an almost instinctive understanding of how to communicate with and train horses, but Lucy would be the one to grow the business side of things, to turn their modest ranch into something larger. When Samuel was 12 and Lucy was 8, Dalton proposed expanding the operation significantly. They had saved enough money to purchase the adjacent property, which had good grazing land and another creek. It would double their capacity and allow them to breed and train more horses than ever before. "It is a risk," he admitted as they discussed it. "We would have to take on more help, invest in more infrastructure. If the market for horses crashed, we could lose everything." "But the market is strong and getting stronger," Nora pointed out. "The army is expanding their cavalry, ranchers keep moving into the territory, and everyone needs good horses. I think the risk is worth the potential gain." They bought the property and spent the next 2 years developing it, building new corrals and a second barn, hiring 3 more ranch hands. The expansion was everything they had hoped for, allowing them to specialize in breeding and training while also boarding and training horses for other people. Their reputation grew, and buyers came from as far away as Texas and Montana to purchase horses that bore the Hayes Ranch brand. On a warm evening in June of 1893, 15 years after Nora had stumbled across the prairie half dead from thirst and loss, She sat on the porch of their enlarged house and watched her family work together in the corral. Samuel, now 17 and nearly as tall as his father, was demonstrating a training technique to one of the ranch hands. Lucy, 13 and sharp-eyed, was making notes in a ledger, tracking which horses were ready to sell. Dalton moved among them all, offering guidance and encouragement, his hair now showing threads of silver at the temples. Nora's hair had its own silver threads now, and her hands were roughened from years of work, but she felt no regret for the life she had chosen. Or rather, the life that had chosen her when circumstances tore her away from everything familiar and forced her to become someone new. She thought about the girl she had been at 21, scared and lost, believing she would die alone on the empty prairie. That girl could never have imagined this future: a thriving ranch, a husband she loved deeply, 2 healthy children growing into remarkable people. She could never have imagined finding not just survival, but joy. "Mother, are you crying?" Lucy had appeared on the porch without Nora noticing, her young face concerned. "Happy tears," Nora assured her. "Just thinking about how much things have changed." "Changed from when?" "From when I first met your father. I was in a very dark place and he brought me into the light." Lucy sat down beside her, tucking herself against Nora's side the way she had when she was small. "Father says you saved yourself. He just happened to be there to help." "We saved each other," Nora said, which was the truest answer. "That is what family does. Will you tell me again?" "About the dust storm and how you met." Nora had told the story many times over the years, editing it to be appropriate for young ears, but she never tired of the telling. It reminded her of how far she had come, how much she had survived and built. "It was August 1878, and I was traveling with my first family toward Colorado," she began, and Lucy settled in to listen, though she knew every word by heart. That evening, after the children had gone to bed and the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Nora and Dalton took a walk along the creek that ran through their property. The moon was full, painting everything in silver light, and the air was sweet with the smell of summer grass. "Do you ever regret it?" Dalton asked, taking her hand as they walked. "The life you might have had if the storm had not separated you from your family." Nora considered the question seriously. "I regret that they died, or that I never knew what happened to them. I regret the loss and the not knowing. But do I regret the life I have now? Never. Not for a single moment. Even when things were hard, when Samuel was colicky and neither of us slept for months, when we nearly lost everything in the drought of '86. When Lucy broke her arm and we thought she might never regain full use of it, even then, especially then." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "Those hard times taught us that we could survive anything together. Every challenge we faced and overcame made us stronger. Made our family stronger." Dalton cupped her face in his hands, his touch still capable of making her heart race even after 15 years of marriage. "I love you, Nora Hayes. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. And you are the family I chose," Nora replied. "The family who chose me back. That means more than you can possibly know." They kissed in the moonlight, and Nora felt the same flutter of joy she had experienced with their first kiss all those years ago. Some things never changed, never faded, no matter how much time passed. The ranch continued to prosper over the following years. Samuel married a local girl named Josephine when he was 22, and they built a house on the far edge of the property, choosing to stay and help run the family business rather than striking out on their own. Lucy showed no interest in marriage, instead throwing herself into expanding their operation, establishing contracts with the Army and opening a satellite training facility in Concord. "She is going to make us the premier horse operation in Kansas," Dalton said proudly one evening as they reviewed Lucy's latest proposals, possibly in the whole territory. She gets her ambition from you, Nora pointed out. No, she gets it from you. I just wanted a small ranch where I could work with horses in peace. You are the one who taught her to think bigger, to see possibilities beyond the immediate. Nora could not entirely deny this. Over the years, she had pushed for expansion when Dalton would have been content with staying small. Not because she craved wealth or status, but because she understood that growth meant security, and security meant her family would never face the kind of loss she had experienced. By the time Nora turned 45, in 1902, the Hayes Ranch was one of the most successful horse operations in Kansas. They employed 15 people, maintained over 200 horses at various stages of training, and had contracts with the Army, the territorial government, and numerous private buyers. The original modest house had been expanded twice, now sprawling across the land with multiple bedrooms, a real parlor, and even a dedicated office for Nora's business management. Sometimes, Nora would stand on her porch and marvel at everything they had built. She would think about the 21-year-old girl stumbling across the prairie, certain she was going to die, never imagining that survival would lead to this. Prosperity, family, a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. Samuel and Josephine had 3 children of their own now, keeping the house filled with the laughter and chaos of grandchildren. Lucy remained unmarried, focusing her formidable intelligence on running the business side of the ranch with impressive efficiency. Both children had exceeded Nora's wildest dreams, becoming capable, kind people who contributed to the world around them. One evening in the late summer of 1905, 27 years after Nora's first family disappeared in a dust storm, she and Dalton sat together on their porch watching the sunset. They did this most evenings now, a ritual that marked the end of the workday and the beginning of quiet time together. "I am 58 years old," Dalton said suddenly. "How did that happen?" Nora laughed. "The same way I became 48. Time passed while we were busy living." "Do you feel old?" "Because I do not feel old, but my body insists on reminding me with various aches and pains. I feel exactly the right age, old enough to have wisdom and perspective, young enough to still enjoy life." She leaned against him. "Besides, you look quite distinguished with the gray in your hair. Distinguished is what people say when they mean old. No, distinguished is what I say when I mean handsome and mature." She kissed his cheek. "You are aging very well, Dalton Hayes." "Only because I have had you beside me all these years." His arm came around her shoulders. "Do you remember when I found you on the prairie? You were the most bedraggled thing I had ever seen, but even then I thought you were beautiful. You did not. I absolutely did. You had fire in your eyes, determination. I knew you were someone special." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors change in the sky. Nora thought about all the years between that first meeting and this moment, all the joy and sorrow and ordinary days that had woven together to create their life. "I want to do something," she said suddenly. "For my first family." "What do you have in mind?" "A marker." Nothing elaborate, just a simple stone in the cemetery at Concord, acknowledging that they existed and that they mattered. "My parents, Robert and Catherine Owens. My brothers, James and Benjamin. Even though we do not know exactly what happened to them or where they are buried, I want something that says they were here, they were loved, they are remembered." Dalton squeezed her shoulder gently. "I think that is a beautiful idea. We can have it made and placed before winter." They did exactly that. In October, a simple granite marker was placed in the Concord Cemetery, bearing the names of Nora's lost family and the inscription, "Gone but never forgotten." The family they left behind continues to thrive. Nora stood before the marker with Dalton beside her, both their children present along with the grandchildren. It was a small ceremony, just the family gathering to acknowledge those who had come before. "These were my first parents," Nora told her grandchildren, who ranged in age from 10 to 3. "My first family. I was separated from them in a dust storm when I was 21 years old, and I never saw them again. But they taught me to be strong, to survive, to keep going even when things seem impossible. Everything I am, everything we have built started with the lessons they taught me." Little Emma, Samuel's youngest at 3 years old, tugged on Nora's skirt. "Are they angels now, grandmother?" "I like to think so, sweetheart. I like to think they have been watching over us all these years, proud of what we have built." After the ceremony, as the family dispersed back to their various activities, Dalton and Nora remained at the gravesite for a few more minutes. "Do you think they would be proud?" Nora asked quietly. "My parents, I mean. Do you think they would approve of the choices I made? I think any parent would be proud of what you have accomplished. You survived impossible circumstances, built a successful business, raised 2 remarkable children, and created a legacy that will continue for generations. What more could any parent want for their child? I suppose you are right." Nora took one last look at the marker, feeling a sense of closure she had not expected. "Thank you for helping me do this. It feels important, acknowledging them properly. They were important. They made you who you are. I owe them a debt I can never repay for that." They walked back to their wagon hand in hand, and Nora felt lighter than she had in years. The grief of her loss would always be part of her, but now it had a proper place, acknowledged and honored but no longer consuming. The years continued their steady march. Nora and Dalton grew older together, their bodies slowing but their minds and hearts remaining sharp. They watched their grandchildren grow, saw Samuel take over more of the day-to-day ranch operations while Lucy expanded their business into new territories. The Hayes Ranch became an institution, known throughout the region for quality horses and fair dealing. In the spring of 1912, when Nora was 55 and Dalton 65, they decided to take a trip. Not for business, not for any practical reason, but simply because they wanted to see something new together. They traveled by train to Denver, marveling at how the frontier had transformed over the decades they had lived there. Towns that had been nothing but ideas when they first met were now thriving cities. Telegraph lines crisscrossed the landscape. The Wild West was becoming tamed, civilized, though Nora was not entirely sure that was an improvement. "You miss it?" she asked Dalton one evening as they sat in their Denver hotel room. "The way things used to be, the frontier feeling. Sometimes. But mostly I am grateful for the changes. Medicine is better, communication is easier, life is less dangerous." He smiled at her. "Though I will admit there was something romantic about those early days, just you and me and a dream, building something from nothing. We still have each other. That is the most important part. Always have, always will." They returned to Kansas refreshed and ready to resume their lives, but something had shifted. Nora found herself thinking more about legacy, about what would remain after she and Dalton were gone. They were both in good health, but they were not young anymore, and it was time to ensure the ranch would continue to thrive in their absence. With Lucy's help, Nora spent the next year putting all their business affairs in perfect order, creating detailed accounts and documentation of every aspect of the operation. She trained Lucy and Samuel both in aspects of the business they had not previously handled, ensuring they could manage everything without her. "Mother, you are acting like you are dying," Lucy said one afternoon as they worked through yet another set of accounts. You are healthy. You could have decades left. I could, Nora agreed. Or I could be hit by a runaway horse tomorrow. I want to be prepared to know that everything we built will continue after I am gone. It will. You and Father created something that will last for generations. The ranch is strong, the business is sound, and Samuel and I both know what we are doing. I know you do. You have both exceeded every expectation I ever had. Nora set down her pen and looked at her daughter seriously. I need you to understand something, Lucy. You do not have to follow the path I did. You do not have to marry if you do not want to. Do not have to have children if that is not your desire. You can build whatever life makes you happy. Lucy was quiet for a moment. Thank you for saying that. Society expects women to marry and have children, and I have felt that pressure. But honestly, Mother, I am happy managing the business. That is enough for me. Then that is what you should do. Your happiness is what matters, not society's expectations. It was a conversation Nora wished someone had given her permission to have when she was younger, though she recognized that her own happiness had come through marriage and children. Everyone's path was different, and that was not just acceptable but necessary. The years settled into a peaceful rhythm. Nora and Dalton gradually stepped back from active ranch management, trusting their children to handle the day-to-day operations while they enjoyed a slower pace of life. They took walks along the creek, read books together in the evenings, and spent time with their growing number of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. On a warm evening in June 1920, 42 years after they first met on the dusty Kansas prairie, Nora and Dalton sat on their porch watching yet another spectacular sunset. Nora was 63 now, Dalton 73, both of them showing the marks of age but still vital and present. "Do you know what today is?" Dalton asked. "Tuesday," he laughed. "Well, yes, but more specifically, it is 42 years to the day since I found you stumbling around the prairie, half dead and wholly beautiful." "I was not beautiful, I was a disaster. You were beautiful to me, still are." He took her hand, his grip still strong despite the arthritis that plagued his fingers. 42 years, Nora. We have had 42 years of marriage, of partnership, of building this life together. I would not change a single day of it. Not even the day Samuel rode that wild stallion without permission and nearly gave us both heart attacks. Not even that day. It makes for a good story now. Nora leaned against him, feeling utterly content. Thank you for stopping that day. For helping a stranger who had no right to expect help. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. We saved each other, Dalton said, echoing words Nora had spoken many times over the years. That is what family does. They sat together as the sun disappeared below the horizon, and stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Nora thought about everything they had survived and built, all the love and loss and ordinary miracles that had filled their years together. She thought about the family she had lost and the family she had found, and how both were equally important parts of her story. She was no longer the frightened girl who had stumbled across the prairie believing she would die alone. She had become someone else entirely. A wife, a mother, a grandmother, a businesswoman, a survivor. She had chosen this life, and this life had chosen her back, and that mutual choosing had made all the difference. "I love you, Dalton Hayes," she said into the comfortable darkness. "I love you too, Nora Hayes, today, tomorrow, and every day after." They remained on the porch long after full darkness fell, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something lasting. The ranch stretched out around them, thriving and prosperous, a testament to what two people could accomplish when they chose to build together rather than stand alone. Inside the house, through the windows, they could see Lucy working on accounts by lamplight, her dedication to the family business unwavering. Across the property, Samuel's house glowed with warm light as his family settled in for the evening. The ranch hands had long since retired to the bunkhouse, their work complete for another day. Everywhere Nora looked, she saw evidence of the life she and Dalton had created, spreading out in widening circles from that chance meeting on a dusty Kansas plain. The next morning brought the familiar routine of ranch life, but Nora approached it with renewed gratitude. She helped Dalton feed the chickens, a task they had taken over from the ranch hands, enjoying the simplicity of scattering grain and collecting eggs. They breakfasted together, discussing plans for the day, though those plans were much less ambitious than they had been in their youth. "I thought we might ride out to the north pasture," Dalton suggested. "Check on that mare that is due to foal any day now." "We have people who can do that," Nora pointed out. "We do. But I want to do it, while I still can." Nora understood. They were both acutely aware that their time of being physically capable was limited. Better to do things while they still could than to wait until they could not and regret the missed opportunities. They saddled 2 gentle horses, both animals they had trained themselves years ago and kept in semi-retirement now, and rode out across their land. The morning was clear and beautiful, with wildflowers dotting the prairie and meadowlarks singing from fence posts. Nora breathed deeply, filling her lungs with the clean air, and felt blessed beyond measure. The mare was in the north pasture as expected, looking uncomfortable but not yet in active labor. Dalton examined her with practiced eyes and determined she had at least another day before the foal arrived. "Good bloodlines on this one," he said, stroking the mare's neck. "Should produce excellent offspring." "You say that about every pregnant mare," Nora teased, "because it is always true. We only breed the best with the best." They let the horses graze while they sat in the grass, enjoying the sunshine and each other's company. This was Nora's favorite kind of day now, simple, peaceful, filled with small pleasures rather than dramatic events. "I have been thinking," Dalton said after a comfortable silence, "about what happens after." "After what?" "After we are gone. I know Lucy and Samuel are capable that the ranch will continue, but I want to make sure they understand what we built here. It is not just a business. It is a family, a community. All these people who work for us, who depend on us, they are part of what we created. They know that. We taught them well." Nora plucked a blade of grass and twirled it between her fingers. "But I understand what you mean. You want to be sure our values continue, not just our business practices." "Exactly. We built this place on the idea that everyone deserves respect and fair treatment, that hard work should be rewarded, that family comes first. I do not want that to get lost as the ranch grows and changes. Then we write it down. Create a mission statement or founding principles, something official that Lucy and Samuel can use to guide their decisions." Nora warmed to the idea. "We can involve them in creating it, make it a family document that gets passed down through generations." They spent the next several weeks doing exactly that, gathering the family together to discuss what the Hayes Ranch stood for and what they wanted it to continue representing. The conversations were rich and meaningful, spanning multiple generations and perspectives. Samuel spoke about the importance of training horses with patience and kindness rather than force, about building trust with the animals in their care. Lucy emphasized fair business practices and treating employees well, arguing that the ranch's success was built on the loyalty of good people who felt valued. The grandchildren, now young adults themselves, talked about sustainability and thinking ahead to future generations. By the end, they had created a document that outlined the core values of the Hayes Ranch: respect for animals and people, fair dealing in all business matters, commitment to family and community, sustainable practices that would allow the ranch to thrive for generations, and a dedication to helping others when possible, just as Dalton had once helped a stranger on the prairie. They had the document printed and framed, hanging copies in the ranch office, the main house, and the bunkhouse where all the employees could see it. It was a tangible reminder of who they were and what they stood for, and Nora felt deep satisfaction knowing it would guide the ranch long after she and Dalton were gone. Life continued its steady pattern through the 1920s. Nora and Dalton became fixtures on their porch, the old couple who had built something remarkable and now enjoyed the fruits of their labor in peaceful retirement. They welcomed new great-grandchildren, celebrated anniversaries and milestones, and quietly supported their family in 100 small ways. Dalton's health began to decline in 1925, his heart growing weaker despite his doctor's best efforts. He remained cheerful and engaged, refusing to become an invalid, but everyone could see he was slowing down. Nora stayed close, treasuring every moment they had together, knowing their time was growing short. One evening in late September, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before, Dalton took Nora's hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For 47 years of marriage. For 2 wonderful children and all the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. For building this life with me. For choosing me and letting me choose you." Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "You are talking like you are saying goodbye." "I am saying thank you. There is a difference." He squeezed her hand gently. "Though I will not pretend I am not tired, Nora, my heart is giving out. The doctor said maybe months, maybe less. I wanted you to know that I am at peace with it. I have lived a full life, loved and been loved. What more could anyone ask for?" "More time," Nora said fiercely. "I want more time with you. I know, love, but we do not always get what we want. We get what we get and we make the best of it." He pulled her close. "You taught me that, you know. That day I found you on the prairie, you could have given up. You had every reason to lie down and die. But you kept walking, kept fighting. That strength inspired me then, and it has inspired me every day since." Dalton Hayes died peacefully in his sleep 3 weeks later, Nora beside him as she had been for 47 years. He was 78 years old, and he slipped away as quietly and gently as he had lived, leaving behind a legacy of kindness and hard work that would echo through generations. The funeral was held at the Concord Church, packed with people whose lives Dalton had touched over the decades. Ranch hands who had learned their trade from him, buyers who had always received honest dealing, neighbors he had helped in times of trouble, and of course his family, spanning 3 generations. The minister spoke about a life well lived, about a man who had treated everyone with respect and kindness, who had built something lasting and good. Nora sat in the front pew, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and felt the weight of loss pressing down on her. 47 years was a long time, but it was not enough. It would never have been enough. She had lost her first family to a dust storm and had spent decades building a second family with Dalton. Now half of that foundation was gone, and she felt untethered in a way she had not experienced since she was 21 years old and alone on the prairie. But she was not alone now. Samuel sat on one side of her, Lucy on the other, both of them offering silent support. Her grandchildren were nearby, some of them crying openly for the grandfather they had loved. The church was full of people who cared about her family, who had been part of the community Dalton had built. She would survive this loss as she had survived the first one, by putting one foot in front of the other, by leaning on family, by remembering that life continued even in the face of grief. Dalton was buried in the Concord Cemetery, not far from the marker they had placed for Nora's first family years ago. Nora stood at his graveside as the coffin was lowered into the earth, and she spoke to him silently in her heart. "Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me, for building this beautiful life with me. I will miss you every day for the rest of my life, but I will not regret a single moment we had together. You were the family I chose and who chose me back, and that love will carry me through whatever comes next." Life after Dalton's death was difficult but not impossible. Nora moved through her days with the same quiet determination that had always characterized her, finding purpose in her family and in maintaining the legacy she and Dalton had built. She spent time with her great-grandchildren, sharing stories about their great-grandfather and the early days of the ranch. She worked with Lucy on the business accounts, her mind still sharp despite her advancing age. She took walks along the creek, remembering all the times she and Dalton had walked there together. Samuel worried about her, suggesting she move in with his family so she would not be alone in the big house. But Nora refused gently but firmly. "I am not afraid of being alone," she told him. "I was alone before I met your father, and I survived it. I have you and Lucy and all the grandchildren nearby. I have purpose and work that still needs doing. I will be fine." And she was fine, in the way that people who have survived great loss can be fine. She missed Dalton with an ache that never fully went away, but she did not let that grief consume her. She had learned long ago that survival meant continuing to live even when part of you wanted to stop. Nora lived for another 7 years after Dalton's death, remaining mentally sharp and physically capable until the very end. She saw the Hayes Ranch continue to grow and evolve, saw new generations join the family, saw the values she and Dalton had established continue to guide their legacy. On a warm June evening in 1932, 75-year-old Nora sat on her porch watching the sunset, something she had done nearly every evening for over 50 years. Lucy was with her, having stopped by after finishing work in the office. "Mother, are you feeling all right? You look tired." "I am tired," Nora admitted, "but it is a good tired, the kind that comes from a life well lived. You should come inside, it is getting cool. In a moment, I want to watch the sun set first." Nora gazed at the brilliant orange and pink sky, the colors that had marked the end of thousands of days on this land. "Your father proposed to me watching a sunset like this. Did you know that? You have told me the story many times. It bears repeating. He said we were already partners in everything that mattered, and marriage would just make it official." Nora smiled at the memory. "He was right. We were partners from the moment he found me on that prairie. We just needed time to realize it." Lucy took her mother's hand. "You miss him." "Every day, but I will see him again soon, I think." "Mother, do not talk like that. You are healthy and strong." "I am 75 years old, Lucy. I have lived a long, full life. I am not afraid of what comes next." Nora squeezed her daughter's hand. "I am proud of you, you know. You and Samuel both. You have taken what your father and I built and made it even better. The ranch will continue long after I am gone, helping people and horses alike. That is all I ever wanted. You built something remarkable, Mother. You survived impossible circumstances and created a legacy that will last for generations. Your father and I built it together. That is the important part. We chose each other, we built together, and we created something that mattered." Nora leaned back in her chair, suddenly very tired. "Family is not just who you are born to. It is who chooses you and who you choose back. Remember that, Lucy. Pass it on to your nieces and nephews, to their children and grandchildren. That is the real legacy, not the ranch or the money, but the idea that we choose our family through our actions and commitment." Lucy wiped tears from her eyes. "I will remember. I promise." They sat together as the sun disappeared below the horizon and stars began to emerge. Nora felt peaceful, complete in a way she had not felt since Dalton's death. She had survived so much, lost so much, and built so much. She had lived a life that mattered, had made a difference in the world, had loved and been loved in return. Nora Owens Hayes died peacefully in her sleep that night, 75 years old, and surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. Her funeral was even larger than Dalton's had been, a testament to the respect and affection people felt for the woman who had helped build one of Kansas's premier ranches, who had treated everyone with fairness and kindness, who had survived loss and created something beautiful in its place. She was buried beside Dalton in the Concord Cemetery, her marker simple but eloquent: Nora Owens Hayes, 1857–1932. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she chose family, and family chose her back. The Hayes Ranch continued to thrive for generations, guided by the principles Nora and Dalton had established and the example they had set. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried forward the legacy of respect, hard work, and commitment to community. The ranch employed hundreds of people over the decades, trained thousands of horses, and became an institution in Kansas agriculture. But more than the business success, what endured was the story of how it all began. A young woman lost on the prairie, a kind cowboy who stopped to help, and the family they chose to build together against all odds. That story was passed down through generations, a reminder that family was not just about blood relations, but about the people who chose to stand beside you, who helped you survive and thrive, who built something lasting through commitment and love. Nora had lost her first family to a dust storm and forces beyond her control. But she had found her true family in Dalton Hayes, in the children they raised together, in the community they built through decades of hard work and fair dealing. She had learned that being left behind was not the end of her story, but the beginning of something new and beautiful. She was left behind by her family, but the cowboy became the family she chose and who chose her back. In that choosing, in that mutual commitment and love, she found everything she needed: purpose, belonging, legacy, and a love that endured beyond death itself. That was the true happy ending. Not perfect circumstances, but perfect love. Not absence of loss, but presence of meaning. Not the family she was born into, but the family she built with her own hands and heart.